This is Nan McKay, and I would like to introduce you today to Abigail Teixeira. Abby is a second-generation Latina Canadian whose parents immigrated from El Salvador in 1985, escaping a violent civil war happening at that time. Over the past 7+ years, she's diligently worked to overcome deep and painful trauma stemming from a childhood of violence, abuse, and addiction. Through a rigorous journey of personal development, she's achieved a whatever it takes attitude and a mindset that has led her to a path of holistic healing and recovery. So welcome, Abby.
Hello, I'm so glad to be here, Nan.
Abby, you speak on the roots of belief. How old were you when your family escaped from El Salvador? And tell us what was happening in the country and how did your family escape?
So I was actually 6 months old when we landed here in Canada. And backtracking a little bit, my parents were 17 and 21 when we moved here to Canada, very young. My dad, he had been a child soldier at age 14. There was a very violent civil war happening in Central America and in El Salvador, where they're from. And it was just, it was intense. There was a lot going on there. My dad ended up leaving the military. And in those times, when you do that, your life is in danger. You can't just up and leave. But because he knew that he was expecting with my mom, and he got an opportunity for the possibility of moving here to Canada, being sponsored by an auntie that was already here as a refugee. They jumped at the chance. And so they did all the paperwork and then they left. And my mom was about 8 months pregnant when they crossed over and layovered in Mexico. And so some paperwork delays happened and I ended up being born there. I spent the first 6 months of my life there. I have dual citizenship, so Mexican and Canadian. And at 6 months old, we moved here to Canada. But a little backstory, I guess, just in terms of what happened with my parents, because it's very important to kind of set a preface, what they experienced. Because my dad, we're talking about generational trauma, basically. So my dad, and his grandpa, they all struggled with addiction. And my dad's dad, so my grandfather, he was also in the army and he ended up going missing. Then they never ended up finding him afterwards. And that was at my dad's young age. So he experienced a lot of trauma. And the way that they kind of helped him through that trauma, his uncles and his family, was through alcohol. And so alcohol runs very deeply on both sides of my family. And, he was a 14-year-old kid trying to process what had happened. And they just basically said, here, take this, and this will make it go away. And you don't have to think about it or worry about it. And so then that began for him, what ended up being an addiction very early on. And then, of course, he joined the military very young and experienced so much trauma. The things I only know of small stories. I don't even know the half of it. And from what I've heard, just a lot of really horrible things that he had witnessed and experienced in that time, that as, from age 14 to 21 when he left the country. So when we moved to Canada, my mom was 17, he was 21, they had a 6-month-old, and then shortly afterwards, my sister was born, so about a year and a half later. And there was this young couple in this brand new country, didn't know the language, didn't really have any supports, just my auntie that was there. And my dad obviously still trying to process everything that had happened. And again, still turning to alcohol mainly. And so because of that, me and my sisters, we ended up having another sister a few years later. So there's 3 of us. We just grew up in a very chaotic home, just from the addiction, from alcohol. There was a lot of violence. There was a lot of abuse. just a lot of confusion for a young child to kind of live through. Why was this happening? Like not understanding, right? When you're a kid and you're starting to see the people around you unstable and really hurting and turning to substances is very confusing for a child to really make sense of it. So that's basically how, early on in childhood, the trauma just kind of passed from one generation to the next and ended up with me and my sisters.
Well, you have experienced then what we call the cycle of trauma and abuse.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us more about your story.
Mm-hmm. So, like I said, growing up in that type of home, and my parents did the best that they could with what they knew, and not having any supports, not like steep learning curve of learning the language, finding a job, all of that stuff, right? It was very unfavorable circumstances. We're thankful that we were in a safe country, that we had a safe home, per se, instead of being in a war-torn country at the time, a third world country. So I'm very grateful and thankful for the sacrifices that my parents made. But again, not knowing any better, they did pass along the cycle of abuse. And for me, it came in the form of physical, violent abuse, sexual abuse. I experienced sexual abuse as a child numerous times from multiple people and adults in my life. And what that did to me, for me, is that it really caused me to just really shut down. I just shut down because, again, when we're in these kind of environments and these type of things are happening, it's not encouraged to talk about it. You don't talk about these things. It's all very much shrouded in secrecy, a lot of shame. You don't talk about what's happening in your home life to anyone. It's not their business, is what you're told. And you kind of are told to just move on with life and pretend as if it never happened. And for me, as a young girl, I'm trying to make sense of this when I know inherently in my body, viscerally know that what I've experienced is not right. But it's being kind of brushed under the carpet and really minimized. And so I went for so many years with this feeling and this deep sense of just confusion, loneliness, questioning why was this happening to me? What did I do? Was there something wrong with me? All of those things. And it wasn't until I hit the teenage years when after years, I guess I'll back up a little bit. Before the teenage years, there was definitely a lot of unhealthy ways that I learned to cope with the pain and the struggles that I had gone through. I had eating disorders. I had a couple of suicide attempts as early as 9 years old, just because I struggled with a lot of depression, anxiety. Again, it's just this young girl, just trying to make sense of the world, and it just doesn't make sense, right? But like I said, viscerally, just knowing that there's something wrong, right? And I tried finding validation from so many different ways, and as we know, when we try to do that from an external point, we're trying to fill this void internally. It's just maybe temporarily it might be filled up for a little while, but then it all fizzles away and then you're still left with that emptiness. And so fast forward now to my teenage years, I started getting around, kind of the popular kids in school, and what they were doing was drinking and experimenting with drugs. And the first time I personally tried alcohol myself was at 15 years old. And the thing I remember the most about that experience was that, like, I didn't even like the taste of it. It wasn't something like in terms of like the substance itself, but the effects, and how for that moment, that night, I realized that I didn't have to feel anything, that I got to escape for that one, even if it was for that moment, I escaped from the pain that I was dealing with and carrying with all of my life. And I was instantly hooked. It was like an instant addiction for me. And that led to years of basically spiraling down a very deep spiral of addiction for myself. And it was really a medication. When I look back at it, it really was the best way for me to medicate myself. And again, not have to not have to think about anything, and just escape. And of course, when you're living a lifestyle like that, it takes you down a very dark path, and many significant crazy things happened to me from age 15 till age 29, when I made the decision that for me, it really did get down to a life or death matter, where I knew, I felt it in my soul that if I didn't change if I didn't change my life, and I didn't change what was happening in my life at that moment with the addiction and the cycle, that I was going to die. I really felt it. I was playing with fire a lot. It was just a very chaotic time in my life. And that really brought me to my knees. And in between that, I went to school, I got my nursing degree. I was very functional, so like on the outside looking in, it seemed everything was fine. Because alcohol is so very much, it's very much part of our culture. And, when people have a night out drinking and sometimes you go a little too far, we laugh about it the next day. It's like, oh, like we had a good time, and like, just exchange stories and things like that. It's very rare that we really stop and look at, the habits that some of our peers are having, and, questioning, like maybe they're having a little too much, or maybe there's a concern here. It's just kind of very much accepted. And that was very much the case for me and my friends in my social circle, where we all like to have a good time. We all like to drink, very heavily and laugh about it the next day, and on the cycle continued. But in between that, I was very much suffering, because as I'm trying to drown out all of these things that I had experienced, it's still there, like it doesn't go away. Yes, I might have buried it. Yes, I might have numbed it, but it was still very much there. And really, now that I've, kind of on the other side of it and doing the inner work, I recognize that the big thing for me was when I decided to go down the path of alcohol and numbing. What I ended up doing was disconnecting myself with my little me. That little girl that had suffered all of these traumatic incidents and experiences. I just completely disconnected from her. And as the years progressed, here was this little me still inside me, still yearning to be validated, yearning to be acknowledged, yearning to be loved. At the end of the day, just really, really cared and loved. And I was just drowning her and drowning her and drowning her. And it became so painful that to the point where if I wasn't numbing myself, it was almost unbearable. I couldn't even be with my thoughts. I couldn't be with myself unless I was, drinking, definitely experimenting with drugs is part of my story as well. And it was just a very, very sad, lonely life for myself. And, and no one really knew the true suffering that I was going through. Because like I said, I was very much functional. Like I was working a full-time job. I ended up meeting the love of my life. We got married, we bought a home, we traveled, we had cars, all of that stuff, but deep inside, I was very much fading away. And I knew that something very serious was going to happen unless I made the changes. And I didn't know what that was going to be, what that was going to look like. I just knew something needed to change. And it was like this cross on the, like a crossroads. And I made the decision at that point in time, which was about 8.5 years ago now, actually.
I'm visualizing you as a child. I'm not sure how old you are when the abuse started, but I'm visualizing a lot of alcohol use within the family, and then offering you, I don't know, for sale or to relatives. How did that work?
Like in terms of the abuse? Yeah. The predominant person of the abuse was definitely my dad, just very violent outbursts, things like that. And being around adults in my life who are supposed to be trusted. They're, extended family members, things like that. But again, they're also, using substances, they're also drinking. And so being put in situations where, as a little girl, I was left with, a family acquaintance. I think this was like at 6 years old. And, he basically started touching me, like sexually molesting me. And, like most predators do, he told me, not to say anything, that it was going to be our little secret. And that if I told anyone anything, that no one was going to believe me anyways. And that, just basically that it was okay what was happening. And again, that was another moment in my life. And this is why I say that I knew then that what was happening was wrong. I just felt it. Like I was crying, I was scared, like I was a 6-year-old little girl, and I was terrified. And I did keep silent for quite some time, just because I didn't know. I believed him. He said, don't say anything because people are going to be mad at you, all of that stuff. And what ended up happening was that I actually ended up telling the adults in my life eventually what had happened. And it turned into this big confrontation. And basically, I was made to confront this person, and he denied it, completely denied it, and called me a liar and said I was seeking attention, and just completely shut it down. And so, like most, traumatized, unhealthy families, from that experience, everyone just kind of shooed it away and brushed it under the rug, and then we moved on. And here I was, who was basically told I was a liar and what I was saying wasn't true. What that did for me, it just shut me down. And what it did is actually, I chose to keep silent in future situations when there was abuse that happened, because I didn't want it. It was traumatizing for me. Like, why would I want to muster up the courage, share what had happened, and then be shot down basically, and told that I wasn't being truthful and all that kind of stuff. And what happens is that when in childhood, especially traumatic experiences, they play such a huge role in who we become as adults. And the child who was told that what they felt wasn't valid, that they were exaggerating, that they're making things up, those are the ones that grow up. I know for myself, I grew up to be the adult who didn't tell others how I felt, because I just didn't feel like my emotions or my feelings were really valid. So that's why the alcohol for me was just such a potent and powerful medicine or medication for me, because it numbed those deep rooted feelings of rejection, of invalidation, of silence, of shame, so much shame and secrecy, and even guilt, because as a child, when these things are happening and that they're wrong, you start feeling like you deserve it. Like you start feeling guilty. Like what was it that I did to deserve this? You start making meaning of all these things. Like children are very, they're very resilient, and they find ways to cope, even though they're not healthy. They still find ways to cope, right? And that's what I did. I found ways to cope. Like I said, they weren't healthy ways to coping, but I did the best that I could with what I had at that time, which wasn't very much. And so, yeah, that's basically how the abuse kind of perpetuated for me. And, it was those situations where there's just a lot of chaos, a lot of secrecy, a lot of, being put in places where I was supposed to be safe, but I wasn't. I was supposed to be with trusted adults, but they weren't trusting. They weren't to be trusted. And then those things happen,
Now, you had 2 sisters. Tell me about the effect on them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the 3 of us grew up in the same situation. We all dealt with it in our own way. And I can't speak to how they've, kind of coped and dealt with their own trauma. But what I know is that we all very much clung to each other. We were very, very close growing up. I know my middle sister, we're about 16, 17 months apart. We're very close in age. We were very, very close, and she almost became kind of like my protector when we were little. She was a little bit more, just a little bit more grounded, and just more at that time I felt she was just stronger than me. I've always been very empathetic. I've always been just very emotional, where she was just more of the strong one for us. And she would protect me. She would kind of get in front of me when there was danger, things like that. And oddly enough, the two of them didn't turn to alcohol. They didn't turn to substances. I was the only one out of the three of us that really just went down that path. They both live very good lives now. They're both married. One of them has, my nephew. They have great careers and jobs and all of that kind of stuff. And again, I can't really speak to what how they've chosen to kind of cope with their trauma. But the point is that the three of us for sure all experienced the same thing, but we all chose to deal with it in very different ways. And for me, it was more so seeking, searching, wanting, needing something to fix it. And whatever was in my path was what I clung on to. And, I was 15, was at a house party, there was alcohol, and there you go. And that's what led for me. It was very much a gateway for them. They were never really, I know my middle sister had never any appeal to drinking, just because what she saw with our family line and, with my dad. And, it's interesting when you look back to the three of us kind of experience the same things and kind of going on very different roads in life. And, I was very much so on the extreme end of, continuing the cycle and, just going through just a lot of things and getting in trouble. Before the alcohol was in the picture for me, I was definitely very much a troublemaker in school in terms of fighting, and had anger issues and things like that. Again, because of the unresolved trauma, there was just all this intensity inside of me. And if anyone, looked at me wrong or said the wrong thing, I would snap, because it was almost like a trigger, right? And there was many cries for help. Now, when I look back at it, there were many, many cries for help all throughout my childhood, where they weren't really listened to. Like I talked about a little bit, at age 9, I had my first suicide attempt. And again, it was one of those things where the family knew about it, and they just kind of said, no one really batted an eye on it. It was just kind of okay, just again, and now when I look back at it, I think it's because they just didn't know how to handle it themselves, because they themselves were in this trauma pattern and cycle. My mom was very much traumatized. My dad, has severe PTSD and mental health issues from the things that he experienced. And there was, again, no supports and resources in any direction that we look at, right? And it was just very difficult to really make sense of it all. But again, with the three of us, going back to my sisters, we all just chose to deal with it very differently. And, now they're one of my biggest supporters. And I'm just so thankful for, the resiliency that the three of us have developed through the years, through our experiences, that it ends in our line. The cycle of trauma and abuse really does end with us,
And at 29, outwardly, it appeared you had a great life. But inwardly, you felt troubled and maybe even empty. And then what at that point, what really triggered the mindset shifts that enabled you to break free from those horrible feelings inside?
At that point in time in my life, like I said, I had a lot to lose. I had a career that was blossoming in nursing, that I was very passionate about. I had a loving husband. We were wanting to create this incredible future for our lives. But it's impossible to do that when there's this kind of huge pink elephant in the room, where I would literally go to work, do my job, I'd come home and immediately would be drinking, immediately. And I would drink until I would basically pass out. And then it continued, the cycle continued the next day and the next day and the next day. And, towards the end of my drinking career, if you will, it made me so physically sick as well. The next days, the hangovers were horrific. And I would go into these deep depression, depressive episodes of days at a time where I wouldn't even be able to get out of bed. If I wasn't working and say it was the weekend and I had it off, from Friday to Sunday, I would be basically laid out, and I can remember so clearly waking up one morning, and again, I just felt physically so ill, and then just mentally and emotionally so sick as well. And I remember thinking to myself, I just don't want to live like this anymore. I just don't want to keep waking up feeling like this anymore. And I didn't know like where to turn, what to do, but I can remember that. And I have I definitely have a spiritual background. I've always believed in a higher power, a power greater than myself. And for me, it's God. And, and again, I had disconnected myself from all spirituality. Very early on in my teenage years, when I kind of entered into that whole chaotic period of my life. And I remember falling to my knees and just praying to whatever was out there, God, the universe. And I said, like, I need to change. Something needs to change. Help me, help me. And I remember, kind of coming to admission that I needed the help. That was the first step, really recognizing that I couldn't do this anymore and I couldn't do it by myself. And, calling out to the universe and asking for help, and then coming clean, if you will, to my husband, and turning to him and just really pouring my heart and soul and just sharing that, I was in trouble, I was in big trouble, and I just couldn't keep on living like this. And he didn't know how to help me either, but he was so supportive. He just said, like, whatever it is that we need to do, I'm here for you. I will walk with you through this. Let's look for resources. Let's look for something that will help you. And so I knew, so the first thing was, again, admitting and acknowledging that I couldn't do this anymore. I needed the help. And then it was seeking supports. And so from that moment on, I made the decision, and it was a decision. It really was. I just woke up with the decision and I said, no more. I can't continue doing this. I'm making a decision. I cannot safely continue drinking. And so once I made that decision, then I became willing. And there was a big willingness that I was like, okay, whatever it is that is going to take to help me, I'm willing to try it. Even if it doesn't work, I'll learn from it. And I'll, I'm just willing to try whatever it is. Cause I was just desperate. I was desperate at this point in time. And I knew, like I said, if I continued on this path, that I was going to end up, dead. And I didn't want to leave my husband a widower, and my family and my friends at the time and all of that stuff. Like, it was very real for me. And so I started to go on a journey of resourcing and looking for support. And, in the beginning, I went through, I'm such a huge advocate for professional help. I definitely needed it. I sought, therapy and support groups, and they were life-changing for me. So the support groups for me, and this is why I'm so passionate to do what I now do, which I'll get to that in a bit. When I entered those rooms and I got around other people who had experienced trauma, who had experienced addiction, and I started to hear them share, their stories powerfully and vulnerably. It was like this big weight was lifted off my shoulders, and the weight was the loneliness and the shame, because I was like, oh, wow, like, I'm not the only one. These people know what I'm going through. Like, they understand, by them sharing their stories vulnerably and courageously, it gave me the courage to then share my own stories for the first time ever, really, in my adult life. And, as we all started to heal through the sharing of our stories, and really heal in community, which is so important. Isolation and loneliness are killers. They really are. To feel that you're the only one that is suffering this way is just, it's a horrible feeling. And so I started to go down this path of really just diving deeply into my healing, because once you strip away the numbing and for me, the alcohol, I'm left with suddenly this inner child, this inner me that's been buried all those years. The little whisper that I used to hear is now a scream. it's the scream saying like, look at me, you know, like acknowledge me. And, you know, I started doing this deep inner work and really, you know, journaling and going through therapy and going through support groups and really starting to build this connection with myself again, because I had been for all those years so deeply disconnected, and building this connection with myself, with my inner me, my little me, acknowledging her, loving on her, sitting through the pain of the experiences that we had experienced together, you know, processing it, you know, giving words of affirmation of, it wasn't your fault. I believe you. You are valid. All of those things, you know, through time. And this was all through guidance, right? Because as I started going through these groups and therapies, there were assignments and suggestions of how to process, like journaling became a really big thing for me, and to this day is one of my lifesavers. I love to journal my thoughts, writing pen to paper of what's going on, reading it out. Like it's almost like it's very therapeutic for me, very therapeutic. And that was one of the things that I picked up in my early recovery, was really journaling, talking about, you know, the things that I had buried for all those years, giving it a name, giving it a voice, giving me a voice. And the more I did that, the less scary it became. I had tons of support from, first and foremost, my husband, for sure. He was with me. We've been together now for 14 years. And so we walked a very deep journey together, and he has been there at my side, hand by hand, just very supportive, driving me everywhere to appointments, you know, giving me giving me like pep talks before going into these situations. It was terrifying. Like, I'm not gonna, like, I'm able to speak from a place of the scar now versus the wound. But in those times for me, I was very much in the wound, and it was very terrifying. This was all new for me. At age 29, from, you know, all the years prior, I had never done anything like this before. I had never acknowledged these things to myself, to others. And so as I started to do that, I grew stronger. I grew stronger, and the days became weeks, and weeks became months, months became years. And it didn't get easier per se, because it's difficult. Change is difficult. And that the overarching theme to the past 8.5 years for me has been massive transformation and change. And most people don't deal with change very easily. Like, it's scary. We like comfort, we like security, we like stability. We don't like things to shift and change. But for me, it was all a complete turnaround and change in my mindset, in how I think about myself, how I speak to myself. Now replacing the unhealthy habits that I had developed all these years with healthy ones, like I said, through therapy and journaling, and finding a support of a community of people who were very supportive of my journey, who understood my journey, who were there with me. We all celebrated the highs together. We all even celebrated the lows together, worked through the lows together, all that kind of stuff. And, little by little, I did begin to heal. And it was just very powerful. And, it's at a place where I really started to develop a relationship with myself, connect with my little me. It's still a work in progress, but it's something that I'm very much passionate about, because I've seen the fruits and the results of it. And to have inner peace, to know that I don't have now, 8.5 years later, there's nothing in the world that could happen for me to really look at numbing myself again. Like, there's still, like, once you take away the alcohol, like for me, I thought, okay, like now life is going to be all rainbows and fairy tales, but it's not. Like, life still goes on, things still happen in our life. It's just that now I choose not to turn to substances, alcohol, to numb it. I now deal with it in healthy ways. I learned to process the pain and the experiences in ways that are fruitful for my development and for others. And cultivating that self-love and acceptance has been so crucial. And it's been a work in progress, and it continues to be, but it's really the most important relationship for me, aside from my higher power, aside from my marriage, is that relationship with little me and me as a whole, knowing that, I am worthy, that I didn't deserve what happened. What happened doesn't define me. It happened, almost like for me. And now I get to live this life of almost like a second chance. And that brings for me a lot of gratitude, where I wake up every single morning. There comes a time where I talked about waking up and not wanting to wake up. I would open my eyes to another day, and it was this drudgery of like, oh, here we go, another day. And I think back to that often because I never want to forget where I came from. And now I wake up and I'm excited. I'm excited for life. I'm excited for what's ahead. I'm excited for all the possibilities. And I have 3 small kids. I have a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 1-year-old. And I can proudly say that they've never seen me drink. I've already broken the generational chains of trauma and abuse. They see me working hard with my personal development. The way because being a mom is intense, especially when you have 3 really littles at the same time. When I feel I've messed up, or, I've had a bad moment, or I've lost my patience, or whatever it is, getting down to their level and apologizing and saying, mommy's going to do better. This is all stuff that I never, ever had done for me. Right. And I'm setting the tone for them, for them, how they're going to be, because one day they might be parents as well. And now they'll think back to what it was like for them, when mommy used to, get mad or whatever it is, she used to like say sorry. And that's now the baseline for them. And I'm just so very thankful that I even have this opportunity to even be a mother. Because to be honest, that was something that I never even dreamed of. I never could even think that far ahead. And now it's one of life's greatest gifts. And to be sober and to be in recovery, and now to turn around and have this passion to help others. I think back to where I was 8.5 years ago, and that lost, lonely girl that I was, but I had the resolve, I had the willingness, and I'm so thankful for that. And now I feel very passionate to turn around and help others who were once in that place where I was, walk this path and go through their own journey of transformation and healing, because it is very much possible. I've seen it with my own eyes. I've seen it with myself. I've seen it with other people. And no one needs to continue living a life of quiet desperation. It's really, we need more, especially as a female. I feel very passionate about this as well, is that, as a little girl, I didn't have role models really to look up at. I didn't really have anyone that looked like me, that had an experience similar to me, that I could look and say, hey, wow, look at that person. She understands what I'm going through, and she can maybe help me, or look how far she's come. I didn't have that. And now I get to be that role model for other little girls. First of all, to little me, and now to others, where I can actually say, yes, this is what I've been through. This is what I've experienced, and I've come out of it, and you can too.
I visualized you being in a very deep, dark hole. And I visualized you climbing out of that hole, hanging on to the sides with the dirt sometimes falling and the dirt under your fingernails, and you're getting up higher and higher, and you're scared to look back down, but you've got to keep climbing. And as you climb, you finally get to the top, and you pull your leg over onto the ground and push yourself up.
Mm-hmm.
That's what went through my head when you said that.
Yeah. And I actually speak about that analogy. I definitely was in a deep, dark hole, and I clawed my way out of that hole, like little by little clawed my way. And there were times when I slipped and I fell, but I just kept on climbing until I finally got to the top of that hole and really dug myself out. And now when I think about that, like playing on to that analogy, there's other people that are in that hole,
So how are you helping others heal? Do you have a business that you're doing this, or are you coaching or counseling, or are you just speaking alone? And how are you doing it?
Yeah. So as fate would have it, coming from a place of silence and never speaking about these things, and now speaking on public stages. So I'm a professional speaker now. And how that ended up happening for me was, so early on in my recovery, I had a lot of anxiety. I had a lot of social anxiety because, again, take away the alcohol and you don't have the liquid courage anymore. And my husband is a very social butterfly. He's very outgoing. He loves to connect with other people. And he would take me to networking events. He'd be like, oh, come with me. I'm going to a networking event. And I would go because I wanted to be around him, and I just wanted to experience new situations, new scenarios and experiences. And I met a lot of really cool people through these networking events. And when I started to share with them just little pieces about my story, because they would ask, like, so what are you about? Like, what, what do you do? And I'd like, oh, I'm a nurse. And then I would share a little bit about kind of my background, just little bits and pieces. And there were some people who were very instrumental to my journey, who to this day, I very much thank them, because they spoke belief into me. They said, wow, you have a story to tell and you need to tell it. And I'd be like, what, me? Who, me? Like, I was just like, the thought of like, sharing publicly. But again, it was a seed that was planted. And I just remember one in specific, this one lady said to me, people need your story because there's others out there who are struggling with the same thing that you've struggled with, and they need to hear you share it. And it almost, for me, became a responsibility. When that was spoken over me, it was almost like a responsibility, because I so desperately needed that when I was a young girl and I didn't have it, right? And even as a teen and a young adult, and I didn't have it, right? And so that was a seed that was planted. And then through networking and through meeting a lot of really cool people, I got offered opportunities to speak on small stages at first. And then my very first talk, I was 8 months pregnant with my second son. And I came up, it was a live talk. This was pre-COVID. And there was, I think, 50 people in the audience. I went up with my notes, and I had my sheet written down. I was shaking in my boots, literally. And I went up there and I shared openly and vulnerably my story, my journey of recovery and my past and all that kind of stuff. And I remember when I came off, it was a 10-minute talk. And when I came off of the stage and sat down, and after it was all over, I had a flood of people come up to me and kind of pull me aside, and they started to share with me. These complete strangers started to share with me, I have a daughter who's struggling with addiction. I don't know how to help her. What would be your advice? Where can I point her, in what direction? Others would come to me literally crying tears, and they would hug me and they'd say, I am also a child of an alcoholic. I also experienced abuse, those kind of things. And it was so empowering when I started to hear these like validations and how it impacted people. I started to realize the power of story, and the power of me being vulnerable and making it safe for others to come and share their stories, to me, a complete stranger. And then one thing led to another, where, I started speaking on bigger stages. So I've spoken in 2 Blue Talks, and the last one was in November in Miami. And that was also in front of a live crowd. And it was amazing. It was so amazing. And the more I've done this, the more layers I'm able to peel for myself, and the more easier, not even easier, but the more I can stand in my truth and my power and speak boldly about these things that once had such a deep rooted shame over me and such a hold on me. And now, without any shame, without any judgment, I speak it very matter of factly, like, this is the facts, this is what happened, and this is what I was able to do. And I've had a calling last year, and it was late in the year, where I knew I wanted to transition out of my nursing career. As much as I've loved it for 15 years now, I feel a higher calling now to just really, this is my calling, to really help others through their own transformation journeys. And so I took a big leap and a big investment in myself last year. And I'm currently in a certification program to become a certified coach and facilitator. I'm working on my first course that's set to release this spring. And it's basically to help, I'm going to say women, but individuals who are really at a place in their life where I was 8.5 years ago, who are really seeking and searching and wanting true change and transformation in their life. And I get the honor and privilege to now take them by the hand, go to that deep, dark hole and help them with a hand up come out of that hole and walk through the journey and the path of recovery and healing. Because again, it's possible. And now, I have resources, I have mindset, I have tools, I have so many things that I want to share with others. I just don't want to keep this precious treasure information to myself. And so, yeah, so I'm going down the path now. And also with the speaking came the opportunity to write about my experiences, and my work has been featured in 2 best-selling books, compilation books. One of them is called Heal 4.0, and the other one is Business Life Universe Volume 7. And both of them, I share my story through recovery. Again, it's just kind of in a nutshell because it's a compilation book, and I'm currently writing my own memoir, which I'm giving myself. It's a big project for sure, but I do see that in the next few years to really just releasing my memoir and having my own book of everything that I've experienced, everything that's happened, and the journey through healing and recovery and transformation, and really just making a big impact, not just of success but significance.
Right.
Because I'm very successful in my nursing career and in other areas of my life. But when you can look even one person in the eye and they tell you that you changed their life by your example, that's significance. That hits in such a totally different way than success ever does, than any sort of medal, than any sort of award or recognition, is to really know that you're making impact in other people's lives. It's such a gift. And I'm just so thankful that I'm able to be in that place now where I can gift this, to others.
Well, I think it's fabulous, and I love the track that you're on. I think it's exactly the right track.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how can people contact you?
Yeah, so I have a website. It's launching in a week, actually, in a week's time, and it's www.abigailteixeira.com. Everything
Abigail Teixeira.
Teixeira.
Oh, after your name.
Yes.
Of course.
Yeah, and so everything is going to be on there, all of my media and ways to connect with me. And when you sign up to my newsletter, you also receive automatically a free gift. It's a workbook for anyone who's wanting to just get started in their healing and recovery journey. And again, when I talk about recovery and addiction, I also want to put this out there as well, because I think it's important that it doesn't just mean alcohol and drugs. Many people struggle with addiction in many different ways. It could be food, alcohol, sex, gambling, shopping, so many different things. And from my experience in the last 8.5 years, when people turn to those in excess, when they turn to these things excessively, there's a deep rooted reason why they're doing that. It's some sort of an escape. It's some sort of a numbing from some sort of trauma or deep rooted issue that they're trying to run away from. And I want to work with those people because again, it's the mindset that I've been able to develop and applies to all of that kind of stuff, to breaking free from any sort of addiction.
It's the difference between success and significance.
Mm-hmm.
Success is doing things to benefit yourself. Significance is doing things to benefit others.
Yes.
And make a difference in their lives. And that's exactly what you're doing. Thank you so much for sharing everything that you did. And I'm sorry that you had to go through what you went through, but all things are for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the reason is to make the difference in all those lives that you still can touch.
Yes, definitely. Can't change what happened, but we can change the trajectory of our future, both with what we decide today. So I'm very grateful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Abby.
Thank you.